Welcome to heCast, the official podcast of He Changed It. I am Mike Chisholm. I am your host. I am, as always, excited to be the host for this. John De Freitas, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be part of heCast today.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's a real honor and pleasure to be a part of this podcast. And I've been looking forward to it since I first heard from Candace a couple months ago. So just glad to be here.
That's fantastic. With some of the media that we've had lately with the release of the app, some people have been asking Candace and Shannon about the idea of a couple of women founding this company here, and it's so cool to see the light bulb go on for people, because they ask with a degree of we live in this very cynical, conspiracy-minded culture these days, and I think that that people sometimes that will be their opening salvo or their opening opinion when they hear about something, and they're like, why are two women starting something like this? And at the end of the day, they keep going back to the fact that women need to be part of this equation.
Yes.
And with the rise of the feminine power, that feminine power has a lot of, like go back to Spider-Man, with that power comes responsibility. And if we don't want to repeat what we've seen in the past, lest we forget, the solution is going to be coming together, not building schisms between us.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree, Mike. And so much of the work, so much of the real shifts may have taken place within the unique relationship that takes place human to human.
Yes.
We tend to find ourselves always caught in this identity of, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm black, I'm white, I'm Asian. We tend to sort of live in these little boxes of identity and forget the very human connection that we all have, even though we're different. And we want to celebrate differences, but unity, male to female and gay man to straight man, and this has been happening for a long, long time, but only now are we openly discussing the really positive nature of these diverse perspectives and how we can heal what is this predominantly misogynistic story, but we're talking about a male-dominant culture around misogyny and a real false myth, I would say, of masculinity, which I think finally over the last 20, 30 years is exploding, and we're getting where you're taking us, and I'm really happy to say that.
At the end of the day, I think you talk about vulnerability. And we've talked a lot about vulnerability already on this broadcast throughout many of the episodes. We talk a lot about vulnerability, and it's we know that it is a key to all sorts of solutions. Is the idea that we can actually bear it the way it is, and accept it the way it is, and talk about it the way it is, and move forward. I think when you talk about this trauma, John, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit, you talk about coming out as a gay man. I don't know when you came out exactly. I've got a lot of friends who they've got their own story when it comes to that. You were essentially, and when we talk about trauma, and I don't want to confuse the two things, but many times, especially growing up when you did, there is a forced vulnerability. When something like that happens, where it's like, no, I need to live my authentic life, and you almost have to go through this rite of passage of vulnerability to get to the other side of that authenticity that you're looking for. That's you. That's your whole life. But there are a lot of guys out there who it may not be something as obvious, and so they take that trauma and they bury it, and they don't get vulnerable about it. They're never forced to kind of reckon with it. And it just kind of sits like a skipping record in the background. Is what I'm saying on base or off base? What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, no, you're bang on, Mike. Yeah, it's in my world, and I think here's a really distinct difference between, say, a straight man and a gay man, and trauma in general is, as the outcast, as any outcast, you're forced to, really reflect on what's the norm, and you desperately, at some levels, try to fit in with the norm, but you realize that ultimate difference, and I think the notion of what it is to be a man comes into gay or straight, and like, who's more of a man, who's the real man, and then we start to then, we have all these stories.
Yes.
So I think what you're saying is absolutely true. If men, and I think going back to the notion of recognizing, things like collective trauma, and I've been doing research into that, we need to recognize that, groups of people have suffered, in some cases, hundreds of years of generational trauma, right?
Yes.
From wars to, slavery to whatever. And we are all coming through these systems, and we're born into these systems and patterns, and our families have inherited these. And sometimes they're very obvious systems that are dysfunctional and painful, and sometimes they're not. But the only way to really, develop your true authentic self is to ask yourself, what is it to be a man? How do we be that man? And if I can't be real, then am I really being a man? Am I really being who I'm meant to be? So, that's where I think a lot of the shift should be, is just recognizing that, every one of us has some kind of baggage, and just, work with it, however you do. I'm not going to sort of promote one way or another, but I think sitting in the awareness that we're social beings, we fit in this framework, we're impacted by, lots of other people's ideas of what it is to be a man. Look at Donald Trump. Do we really need to ask that the fact that he exists in this world, like many, amazed Canadians, I sit back and go, wow, isn't it scary that there's still an ideology that would tolerate that form of masculinity to running an entire country?
I look at characters like Donald Trump, and there's a guy who could be inserted right into that movie in the way that he talks and deals with people and things like that. I'm not trying to offend anybody, I respect people to believe whatever they want to believe, but we've got a gentleman here who is wields a tremendous amount of power, has a massive microphone, and he acts like he's in an 80s R-rated comedy. And that's, when it comes from an entertainment standpoint, that's the generation I was raised in. That was the generation you were raised in. And when he says things like locker room talk, not that I think that locker room talk is something that shouldn't be examined. It shouldn't be, not that it shouldn't be tolerated, but it should be at least examined and maybe put under the microscope a little bit. At the end of the day, aren't there just like, I look at some people and go, well, what do you think they thought? A guy like that at that age, raised at that, like, isn't he just projecting what a certain slice of his generation, especially very privileged, put into this environment, isn't he just reflecting what he was taught as well?
Oh, absolutely. Whatever he's come from, and I don't know, it's hard not to, what do you say about, Trump? It's kind of interesting now, but anyway, not to be over. I mean, he's still a product of a dysfunctional family, clearly. From what I've heard, and, here's a man born into wealth and power, and a man who's the whole self-esteem, for this family legacy is based on their wealth and power. So that, if you don't live up to whatever standards or whoever's in charge, then how can you possibly have a healthy self-esteem? Now, in that world, of course, he's lucky he's straight, he's got it all going on, and, he's golden boy. But you've got this pervasive, competitive ideology. You're competing in business, Of course, he's hitting all the marks in so many worlds, and for many people, he would be the absolute pinnacle of success.
Yes.
We all want some version of that, maybe not as psychotic as the man, but we all want some kind of version of that success.
Yes.
And to feel like we're men, because we're supposed to achieve success and with recognition, and we need to feel good about what we do, and we need to do all kinds of things. The other thing I think about men's, in the same way that women are encouraged to be nurturers, I think men have been groomed to be leaders.
Yeah.
And one of the profound roles that we play as men, as fathers, I work with many single fathers in communities, is to be leaders. It's so important.
I think there's a lot of men that are searching. I think there are a lot of men that have never been. One of the things that you have done throughout this conversation and other conversations is you've brought up really good questions that men need to ask themselves. but I don't think it ever occurs unless there is a substance abuse issue, unless there is an anger issue, unless there is some sort of real impediment to moving forward in life, or in our culture or in society. If that doesn't happen, it kind of lays in the background unexplored. It's like a fossil that hasn't been dusted off at all. And those questions that you're talking about are super important, because when we ask ourselves those questions, that's what leads to the introspection that needs to happen for the chain of events that you were just talking about to occur. The situations may be different, but many of the feelings are the same, because we come from a culture where we were kind of given that same rhetoric. We've got the genetic. A lot of us have the same genetic programming, that we all do, and at the end of the day, if we're able to question these things and talk about these things and get a little bit vulnerable about it, that might, or that will be the key. But that staying silent is kind of the worst thing, right? It's like that, oh, my knee doesn't feel very good, so I'm just not going to tell anybody about it, and hopefully it gets better. Well, if you don't address it, then, at the end of the day, if you don't go to rehab, if you don't wrap it, if you just try and ignore it, you can do permanent damage.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think things will get worse until you sort of reach a realization. Either someone helps you, or you come to your own realization that something needs to change. And
Yeah.
when it comes down to it, I think the notion of having more vulnerable, authentic conversations is important, is because we sort of have this idea that you go to one certain person to talk to your emotional needs, you deal with someone else on your physical needs, your coach needs, you go to different people for different things. But, we start to realize that we don't have control. I mean, if nothing else, COVID's taught us that we have completely lost control.
Yeah.
Right. And I, for many years, I lived a life without control, but I learned over time that, a more sort of a spiritual side,
Mm-hmm.
that you have to surrender at least at certain moments in time when you really, there's nothing you can do, and really find something or someone, or at least yourself, to trust yourself through the process. So that we have, unfortunately, a culture that's also very fearful, I would say. And, there's a lot of fear that really gets in the way of living our full potentials, and that we hold back and we bury thoughts, traumas, past, and that's okay. We only can cope with, whatever. But if we've started to cut our feelings off from so much that we lose the joy and spontaneity and the things that we're really looking for, then we're really falling into a place of that suffering, and we need to open that up and bring that into awareness. And part of that is being gentle on yourself, and often you'll need someone, I should say, as a confidant or a supporter, maybe a coach or a client, to be that person who reminds you, stop being so hard on yourself. You've got to stop and just remember to be human. And, that awareness comes from just being more real about what you really want to do and what you really don't.
I believe that a term that is being so liberally used right now that it's losing all of its meaning and nobody even knows what it means, and they get it confused with other things, is the term toxic masculinity.
Right.
I think that you would have a very interesting perspective on, like, first off, do you believe in toxic masculinity? Do you think it's just the word misogyny that's just been renamed? Is it a nuanced thing? Do you believe in it at all? When I say toxic masculinity, from your perspective, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the term toxic masculinity. I appreciate it in as much as, for quite some years I spent looking at models in men's studies and things like that. So I'm going to have to assume that these are attitudes and behaviors which essentially are not respecting other people and in the mode of masculinity, I'm presuming this means other women, but for me, toxic masculinity could equally apply to, you know, a corporate office where the cutthroat, you know, greed motivated behaviors are such that there's no trust and they'll stab each other for the prize.
Yeah.
So that toxic masculinity for me is anything that really says violence is okay under certain circumstances. Well, unless I'm, protecting my life, probably not. So, but I'm very much, a believer that just respect, the divide between, and we could have a whole conversation, men and women, but if we just remember, to be emotionally intelligent is to recognize and be aware of who we are, right? And to hold that sense of respect for ourselves. I mean, socially intelligent comes in and says that, you know what, regardless of how you're feeling, it's important to equally respect that other individual. People will disrespect others because they don't really respect themselves much. That's often the levels underneath. So if we just start to appreciate that we need to treat men, women, whoever, whatever category, with human respect, it's going to change. And you're not just seeing your spouse as a male or female that has certain isms. It's like, no, there's a soul here. There's a human being.
Yes.
And how do I relate to that soul? And we need to start thinking more about the souls and what's beautiful within the envelopes that we call male and female and all these wonderful categories that I just love to write.
I just really appreciate your point of view and your perspective. It always makes me think. And yeah, like hearing you talk makes me want to jump in the vulnerability pool, because the water is really good, even though people are afraid that it's ice cold, but it actually is really good. You get used to it pretty quickly, and it turns out to be a pretty cool place. You bring that out, that feeling to me, just talking. So thank you for being a light. I appreciate that very, very much. And we just appreciate the fact that you're going to be part of the He Changed It movement in a lot of ways. And every project that you have going on, we will do our best to help get that out there as well. We're a community. You're a guy who is really good at pulling people together. So thank you very, very much for taking time out of your schedule to be on here. This is not the last conversation that we'll have, but this is just introducing you to the heCast community. So thank you very much, John.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you so much as well.
That's awesome. Well, again, they go by so quickly. That's another episode of heCast, the official podcast of He Changed It. Come join me. Come on in the app. Come find me. I'm Shazza Mike in the app. That's my Shazam and Mike all into one word. I thought it was clever as fuck when I came up with it years ago, because he's my favorite superhero. So Shazam and Mike, Shazza Mike. I can't wait to interact with you, talk with you, and please jump in. Tell us what you think. Ask questions. We're going to have guests in there, and all new features going into the app every single week. We are just getting started, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to finish off now by saying thank you very much for heCast, the official podcast of He Changed It. I'm Mike Chisholm. Have a great week.